interrupt this program to bring you Courage, the Cowardly Dog Month.
Whole month of Courage, the Cowardly Dog. First appearing in 1996, it was picked up by Cartoon Network, who work in the middle of Burbank, and directed by cartoonist John Dilworth. Though many years have passed since the original air date, it's now time for Zack to celebrate this great show.
Well, old sport, what do you think? Neat.
Hey guys, Zack here, and welcome back to Courage Month. So today's reviews we're going to be covering are Stormy Weather and the Sandman Sleeps. So let's get into both of those. Okay, so this episode's a little bit interesting in that Courage is kind of the central plot device of the episode. And this further establishes how much Courage means to Muriel. But this episode actually opens with Courage actually licking a bone and actually chewing on a bone. And as he's chewing, he sees a young girl who is with a storm cloud over her head. And while Courage is initially very confused, but a little terrified at the storm, she eventually notices him and decides to start playing with him and actually throwing a ball for him, and actually just giving him lots of love and affection. Much to Courage's chagrin, since the storm he notes terrifies him a little bit, and he doesn't really like the idea of it, being just him looming over him the whole time. At which point Muriel comes out and notes that Courage made a friend, although Courage tries to deny it. And actually invites her in for some coffee, despite Courage's protest, pointing out that obviously the storm cloud over her head is very dangerous. But in case, nonetheless, she brings them in, which just causes a centralized storm front to be inside their house, and that's bad for obvious reasons. But as they go on, the girl actually explains that she's actually a storm goddess, and that she's actually looking for her dog. Whose dog named Duncan is actually been missing, and she's been trying to find him. And the reason she's so fond of Courage is because Courage is almost a dead ringer for her missing dog. Duncan is a little bit skinnier and a little smaller than Courage, but otherwise they're pink. They're both the same. There's both the same shade of pink, have the same spots. They're dead ringers for each other, minus the size difference. So they're very similar. And Muriel sympathizes with the storm goddess, pointing out that if something happened to Courage, she would very much be just as upset. But in any case, as the storm kind of picks up a little bit, the storm goddess remarks that she doesn't know where her Duncan might possibly be. The things start flying all over the kitchen and start making a huge mess, and Muriel decides to actually close the window, and while she's actually closing the window, the storm goddess actually picks up Courage and actually decides to kind of bring him outside, and asks if Muriel she minds, but Muriel, before she can actually get a word in edgewise, because the storm goddess leaves while she's saying it, does point out that she does indeed mind. And then Eustace walks in, complains about how much of a mess it is, and tells Muriel to clean up. Then doesn't offer to actually help, because why not? But in case later that night, while they're actually eating dinner together, and Courage the storm goddess is very much so lamenting on the fact that she hasn't found her dog yet, but Muriel assures her that she will indeed find him, and that is also not so very subtle of the fact that she's jealous of the storm goddess, and also doesn't want her hanging out with Courage anymore. The storm goddess insists that she'll be taking Courage with her. Much to Muriel's anger, and the two actually start fighting, which causes the storm goddess's storm to actually grow completely out of control. As time goes on and they continue to argue, the house starts to slowly become blown away. Eustace himself actually winds up being blown away in the process. Initially it's him trying to eat his dinner. They're trying to eat spaghetti and meatballs, but eventually his hat flies off, as well as the rest of his clothes, and then Eustace actually clings to the stove for protection, but then he's eventually blown away and he flies off. Courage, meanwhile, prevents Muriel from actually blowing away by actually tying a rope around her ankle, but he winds up getting caught up in the storm as well. And the two start arguing with one another, and the storm continues to get worse and worse. At which point, Courage has a brilliant idea, which is to go and find Duncan and bring him home. So after being hit by the storm goddess's picture of Duncan that she has, he decides to actually let go of the rope voluntarily and actually starts going around the world trying to find out where Duncan actually might be holed up. But he isn't having much luck because everybody he asks hasn't actually seen Duncan or knows where he is. And eventually Courage decides to stop at Burgers Really Cheap for a break. At which point Mr. Mouse, who is revealed to be in the restaurant at the time, he actually tells Courage that he actually did see Duncan, and saw him go into the sewer. Which Courage is very happy about, and then thanks Mr. Mouse for the information, and then proceeds to climb inside the sewer and take a boat that's for whatever reason down there to try and go find Duncan, hollering after him, which the catacombs of underneath nowhere make it very difficult because they just echo off of all the walls of the sewer, and he has a hard time actually tracking him down. But eventually he does come across a large dais with a very large bone on it, and he hears a voice. The voice telling him not to lick the god bone, because whoever licks the god bone will be unable to stop licking the god bone because it's just that good. At which point Courage pokes his head around. He actually sees some dog skeletons on the floor. And eventually he does indeed find Duncan and tries to remove him from the bone. But then Courage develops an itch to actually lick the bone himself, and despite his best efforts, he does indeed start licking the god bone, which Courage is initially happy about until he remembers that Muriel is actually hanging from her ankle, and fearing that she could very well die while she's up there if he stays there forever, desperately tries to detach himself from the god bone, and he does eventually succeed by tickling his own tongue and then wrapping it into a knot so that he doesn't actually lick it, and then he sticks his tongue back in his mouth. At which point he actually grabs Duncan and drags him away from the god bone, but Duncan is still very much looking on the god bone and actually winds up pulling it with him. At which point the dog skeletons that Courage found, which freaked him out earlier, are revealed to actually be sentient and are actually revealed to be the guardians of the god bone, which Courage is surprised about, and they do proceed to, and once they actually catch up to him, which isn't very hard because he's currently dragging a very giant bone behind him. They start beating him over the head with their bones and start dragging him back to their lair. But Courage actually winds up latching onto the god bone and pulling himself free, and then he proceeds to use the god bone as a club and just knock them all senseless and defeat and destroy each and every one of them. But in any case, with the skeletons dealt with, he then proceeds to bring Duncan and the bone back to the house. He reveals that, and then Muriel and the gods are still arguing. So Courage actually gives him a whistle and shows them what he found, which pleases the storm goddess until she realizes that Duncan is refusing to stop licking the bone, which upsets her greatly, and so she decides to actually hug Courage instead and make her dog still continues to argue over the fact that Courage is hers. At which point Courage actually gets a brilliant idea, which is to actually prove that Duncan does indeed love the goddess more than he loves the bone, and the way he does that is by basically kissing up to the goddess. Long story short, he just gives her exactly what she wants. He snuggles up to her. He gives her love and affection. And eventually, Duncan just gets sick of seeing it and chases Courage off and takes his place back at the goddess's side. And with that, the two of them actually leave with the goddess hugging her long lost dog. And all while Muriel and Courage are kind of completely slack-jawed and all because they're not entirely sure what the hell just happened. And at which point they sit back down on Muriel's chair, which is the only thing that hadn't actually blown away in the storm. And Muriel points out that she guesses everybody got exactly what they wanted, and Courage agrees because now he has the god bone to nibble on. So in any case, yeah, this episode is interesting in that. Long story short, Courage becomes kind of the main focus of the villain. This isn't the first time this happened, but she isn't really a villain. She just wanted her dog back. Courage reminded her of her dog, and then long story short, she imprinted on Courage and refused to accept the fact that he wasn't her dog. So that's entirely why she became an antagonist. She wasn't really a threat, well, she was because of the giant storm cloud over her head, but she wasn't really a threat in the way of I'm evil and I'm going to try and take over the world kind of thing. It's more like, I just want my dog back, and your dog reminds me of my dog. That was kind of the whole premise of that. But in any case, that's my review of that episode. Onward to the next one. Okay, so this episode, The Sandman Sleeps, is ironic. So the episode actually sets up a pretty ironic premise of it, which is that it actually starts off with Courage Eustace and Muriel trying to sleep, and Courage can't because they're snoring too loud, and he actually shoves something, and eventually actually shoves some corks in his ears to actually try and block out the noise, and tries to go to sleep that way, which doesn't wind up working because later he also tries to put a fishbowl on his head, which also doesn't work. But in case, as everybody's actually settling down to sleep, we actually are introduced to the Sandman in his literal sandcastle, where it's revealed that he's actually quite literally counting sheep. As it turns out, all of his servants are sheep, and he's currently counting them to actually try and go to bed, to actually try and put himself to sleep. But ironically enough, as he explains, and as he and his sheep explain, he can't go to sleep. He's having trouble falling asleep. Ironic. The guy who in mythology is kind of the mythological figure who's responsible for people falling asleep at night, ironically can't get a good night's sleep. It's funny and a little bit tragic. But in any case, he also points out that he wishes that just once he could actually get a good night's sleep, and actually picks up his listening horn to actually listen to the sounds of people slumbering, pointing out that he wishes that he could join them, and eventually he hears someone heavily implied to be Muriel based on the snoring that he recognizes as having a pretty sound sleep, and decides that he's going to help himself to some of it. And yeah, at which point he actually flies out of the grove where he actually lives. It's just like in a hole of trees, but he bounces around the leaf tops of the trees, and actually winds up going to the Bags farmhouse to actually peer into their master bedroom, while Courage is currently still struggling to actually go to sleep himself, and decides to actually leave the room to actually go and get some sleep, since he figured that's the only way he's going to do that. But as Courage is leaving the room, the Sandman actually winds up opening the door. We're opening the window to the bedroom, and then proceeds to fly in and fly around for a bit before landing on the bed, which freaks Courage out because he realizes the Sandman isn't supposed to be there. But in case, the Sandman then casts an incantation which causes magic sand to actually flow out of Muriel's eyes, and he then gives it to himself, and then immediately becomes sleepy, and now satisfied, he then leaves the bedroom. But now, as a trade-off of that, Muriel can no longer sleep. So long story short, the Sandman, in an effort to get himself some sleep, actually wound up stealing Muriel's own ability to sleep so that he can fall asleep. Which does cause some interesting problems in that Courage is actually trying to figure out what's going on with her, and actually starts investigating her face rather closely to actually try and figure out what's going on. But Muriel has no idea what he's doing, and Courage eventually explains what he saw, and Muriel decides that it's too late for that, and that's way too late in the evening for her to be listening to that, and decides to actually go and make herself some tea. Later that morning, she then is completely confused because she normally gets a very sound sleep, but Courage knows exactly what's wrong with her, and even once again tries to explain to her, but she merely explains that she's sure she'll get a good night's sleep that next night. And then surprising no one, she doesn't. For several days, she gets zero sleep. And eventually, it gets to the point where it starts affecting her mental state. So it's at this point where she hasn't slept for several days and is currently in the process of making Eustace's breakfast, and she kind of whiffs it. First and foremost, she leaves the eggs in the eggshell in the pan with the eggs, and the eggs are severely undercooked. And Eustace even eats it and points out that it's disgusting. And also remarks that she needs to make it right or don't make it at all. At which point Muriel merely explains that she hasn't been feeling herself lately because she hasn't been able to sleep. So Eustace points out that she still hasn't brought him his toast either, so she goes to go get it and comes back with the bowling ball, which Eustace doesn't realize until he's actually gumming it down, and then when he finally realizes that what he's eating is a bowling ball, he actually drops it in surprise, and it lands on his foot and winds up hurting himself with it. And then she realizes that she hasn't actually made Courage's food either, so she brings him the bowl and the can of dog food, but doesn't actually open the can. She just sets it in the bowl and then leaves. At which point Courage realizes that he needs to figure out how to get her to sleep immediately. So that same night he actually decides to play her some soothing music, which Eustace becomes annoyed with because Courage is actually keeping him up by playing it. So he kind of just takes the keyboard and throws it across the end of the room. At which point Courage decides to read her War and Peace to actually get her to fall asleep, which ironically causes him to fall asleep. At which point he tries hypnosis to put her to sleep, at which point Muriel mentions that when she had trouble sleeping as a little girl, her dad used to take her driving to actually get her to fall asleep. So Courage decides it's better than nothing and actually sets her in the back of the truck of Eustace's truck, with the rocking chair and all, and just decides to go on a bit of a drive to actually get her to fall asleep. Which Courage initially thinks works because he actually hears Muriel snoring, but when he looks in the back of the truck, Muriel is still wide awake, and every time, and he then proceeds to wonder what's going on, since he can clearly hear Muriel snoring, but she's not asleep. At which point he realizes that it's likely the Sandman that he's hearing. And he eventually does follow the snoring to the grove of trees surrounding the Sandman's sandcastle. At which point he decides to actually drive the truck through to actually find the Sandman, so he can actually find him and get her sleep back. And by following the sound of the Sandman snoring, he does eventually find the Sandman's castle. And with Muriel's unwitting help, because she's too far gone at this point, he actually uses his tongue as a slingshot to actually send himself flying through the window of the Sandman's castle, and eventually winds up in the Sandman's bedroom. And then closes in on the Sandman to actually try and figure out how he can get Muriel's sleep back. But the Sandman wakes up while Courage is trying and asks him if he's looking for something, which freaks Courage out a little bit because he was expecting the Sandman to be sound asleep. But the Sandman is actually curious as to what brings Courage to his lair. At which point Courage explains to him the situation regarding Muriel, and he pokes his head out the window to see that Muriel is now completely delirious from the lack of sleep and is gone completely batshit insane. And while the Sandman does sympathize with Courage, he does point out that he's not giving it back because this is the best sleep he's had in years, as he explains it. And then proceeds to go back to bed. But Courage won't take no for an answer and actually starts hugging the bed so that there's no room for the Sandman. And this annoys the Sandman, who points out that there's not enough room for them for both of the bed, and tries to get Courage to get up. But Courage outright refuses. But then Courage feels a lump under the mattress and actually goes to investigate and discovers the Sandman's teddy bear is actually stuck under the bed. Which the Sandman eventually chalks it up to his inability to sleep, since he's been sleeping on his teddy bear the whole time, which means he doesn't have a teddy bear to snuggle up with when he goes to bed, and B, he's sleeping on a lump, which twofold just caused him to be unable to fall asleep. And eventually realizing that he now no longer needs Muriel's ability to sleep, he then gives the magic sand back to Courage, who, after bringing Muriel home, and he then gives it back to her, and she falls right back asleep, and as if nothing happened, and she returns completely to normal. And Courage, now satisfied that Muriel can finally sleep, decides to stick some corks into his ear so he can get some sleep of his own, since it's still a thing that their snoring is keeping him up at night. So yeah, this episode is interesting and a little ironic, because the villain of the story is the Sandman, obviously, and well, the episode is just ironic in that the only reason he's a villain is because he couldn't get some sleep, so he decided to steal somebody else's so he could sleep. So ironically, because the guy who's supposed to provide sleep couldn't sleep, instead of bringing sleep to somebody else, he decided to take it, which results in somebody being unable to sleep. So Yeah, so yeah, and that's just a long way. That's just a very confusing sentence, but bear with me. It just means that he had some trouble sleeping, and now that he's actually been placated by finding his teddy bear with Courage's help. He can now actually finally get some sleep for himself instead of having to steal it from others, which is what his entire plan was. He just tried to steal somebody else's sleep, and that was it. He didn't really care about the consequences. He just wanted to get some sleep, and I think we can all relate to that. But in any case, that's my review of the Courage the Cowardly Dog. What did you guys think? Let's get discussing over in the comment section down below, or over on my Discord server, link in the description. Anyway, thank you guys so much for watching. If you enjoyed, be sure to like, comment, and subscribe. Also, be sure to follow me on Twitter in the description below. Be sure to check out my Patreon in the description below as well if you want to help support the show. It's only a couple bucks a month. It does really help me out. And you guys get access to a bunch of cool perks that I'm always saying thanks. So be sure to just go check those out in the description below as well. Also, be sure to check out my Twitch down in the description. I am trying to grow grow that over there. So if you guys want to indeed help me, by all means, link is down in the description. Please go check that out. And also, I'm streaming horror games to go along with Courage Month for the next month. We actually only have like one left, but then we're actually going to be streaming a watch along of the crossover movie with Scooby-Doo. So yeah, that's coming up. Be sure to just follow me over there so you don't miss that, because we're going to be doing that live. And I kind of want you guys not to miss it, so be sure to go check that out. But in any case, thank you guys so much for watching. And until next time, I'll see you guys in the next video. Peace.